Hi, it's really great to see you all here tonight. To see so many people gather together for this event, it's really touching and wonderful. I'm Amy Benson. I'm in the English department, and we are truly thrilled to partner with Latin American and Latinx Studies program and the Communities in Conversation to bring Stephanie Elizondo Griest to Rhodes. And I'd like to also extend some thanks to the other departments who supported us and the people who supported us. I'd like to thank the History Department, Gender and Sexuality Studies, International Studies, Phi Beta Kappa, the Rhodes Lecture Board, and the Spence L. Wilson Chair in the Humanities for their co-sponsorship, and to the many people who made tonight possible. My colleagues in the English Department, including Chanel Benz and Kaki Wilkinson, Lori Garner, and our program coordinator, Lori Yearwood, Elizabeth Petronarola, President Haas and her staff, and the Communities in Conversation team, including Jonathan Judakin, Jackie Baker, Lily Flores, and Jordana Terrell. And a tremendous thanks as well to all of the staff who are here tonight and who are no longer here but have set up. They make these events possible on campus, from sound and set up to the bookstore and to Aramark. So thank you so much for helping us enjoy this evening. And a bit of housekeeping on the event. So if you can, of course, silence your cell phones now and really take it as an opportunity to be here now with the people around you and with Stephanie. And there will be a Q&A period that will be started with a few questions by professors, but then will be opened up to anyone who would like to ask a question. And Communities in Conversation will provide a lovely T-shirt if you do ask a question. So, and Stephanie's books are available for sale afterward. If you would like to get a copy, she is signing books after the event, so do avail yourself of that. So Stephanie Elizondo Griest has led an extraordinary life, living and traveling around the globe, Moscow, Mongolia, Mexico, Cuba, to name just a few of the countries. She's written and edited 5 books, received the Hodder Fellowship at Princeton, which is a huge deal, and countless prizes and awards, including frequent contributions to the Best American Writing Series. She's been an activist, an itinerant storyteller, a seeker, and a listener. And her latest book, All the Agents and Saints, Dispatches from the US Borderlands, now brings her here to Rhodes. It's a book that couldn't be more timely and necessary. This summer, my family and I, attended a 4th of July parade in a tiny town that shares a water border with Canada. Just days before, the policy separating detained children from their parents at the Mexican border became a national story. After homemade floats and antique cars and bicycle and horses that were decorated, along comes the final entry. A flatbed truck turned into a chain-link cage and self-proclaimed deplorables with posters mocking the caged children. There was a certain kind of self-protective logic at work, an intimation that their northern border was at a quantitative and qualitative distance from that situation in the South. And that if you allowed into your consciousness the reality of a child losing their parents, or parents losing their child maybe forever, you might be permanently rearranged. And so that reality must be defended against. Stephanie Elizondo Griest brings those two U.S. borders, Mexican and Canadian, together in her book. And as she does, she questions the very nature of borders that get drawn through ancient communities. She shows us how our borderlands are both hyper-surveilled and a place of secrecy and erasure, erasing mother languages, dumping industrial waste, and moving detained children into tent cities in the middle of the night. Borders are defined by what she recognizes as Nepantla, an Aztec phrase for living in the state of in-betweenness. In the borderlands, she gathers the stories of individuals willing to share them. She tracks down moral ambiguities and divided loyalties and ethnicities, and she demonstrates that these besieged places also birth art and activism and a wisdom that transcends expediency and political absolutism. Stephanie Elizondo Griest has the ethical compass necessary to navigate our borders, and we're so lucky to have her here with us. Please help me welcome her. is amazing. Thank you. And a wisdom that transcends expediency.
Wow. Hola, everybody! Hola, everybody! I am doing amazing. Thanks to all of you. I cannot tell you, when you spend 10 years of your life working on a book, all you can dream of is being able to share it with an attentive group of people, an attentive community, and you all have been that and more. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for inviting me and having me here with all of you. And thank you so much for that lovely introduction. So there's a key... Oh, I will not do that again. Okay. There's a key part to my biography that you all need to know, and that is where I am from. All right, my friends, I am from Corpus Christi, Texas, a.k.a. Corpitos. Has anybody here been to Corpitos? Woo! Oh my God, an amazing number of you. Wow, okay. So y'all will recognize the very best that our city has to offer is actually in this slide. Snow cones, seagulls, and Selena, okay? And so we are located about 150 miles north of the border. And about half of us are Mexican or Tejano, and the other half are white. And this city demographic is actually reflected in my family. My mother is Tejana. My father is Kansan, from Kansas. And I have literally spent my entire life and my entire literary career trying to figure out what it means when an international borderline runs right through you. My first instinct was to flee it. As I like to say, wanderlust literally pumps through my veins. My great-great Uncle Jake was a hobo who saw all of America with his legs dangling over the edge of a freight train. My mother's side of the family were vaqueros on the King Ranch of South Texas, and they were out on the range all day. So I've always known that I wanted to travel far and travel wide. I wanted to be the kind of woman whose stories began with, once in Abu Dhabi. I'll never forget that time in Ouagadougou when. I just had to figure out a few details, right? How, where, and with whose money? Yes. So my ticket out ended up being, let's see, what can we do about that? My ticket out ended up being an invitation to a journalism convention happening in Washington, D.C. And I had to raise money to get there. You know, it was a really big deal. At the time when I was invited, Washington, D.C. seemed like on the other side of the moon when you're growing up in Corpitos. But the keynote address was given by Charles Beerbeyer, who was a political correspondent for CNN. So this is the early 90s, right? And so this man had seen all of the major stories of the day. He had seen the collapse of the Soviet Union. He'd been there to write about the fall of the Berlin Wall. He'd seen riots and revolution and coup d'etat. The entire time he's talking, I'm thinking, this man's job will get me out of South Texas. So when he was done with his oratory, he looks out into the audience and he's like, who's got a question for me? And I raised my hand, I ran to the front of the room, and I said, I want to be you. What do I do? And he looked at me and he said, learn Russian. Next question. And I said, ¿qué? I'm Mexican. I can't even talk to my abuelita, right? I had not even learned Spanish. And why is that? Maybe some of you have this story in your own family, but at least growing up in South Texas, our relatives, my mother's generation and her mother's generation, were punished for speaking Spanish. When my mother was a child, she remembers quite viscerally kids having their mouth washed out with soap for speaking Spanish in the classroom. Kids would have their hands smacked with rulers for speaking Spanish. If that is your legacy, are you going to then turn around and pass it to your small children? No. So that's why I did not grow up speaking Spanish myself. And furthermore, Spanish to me had become this difficult language for me. It was the language of jokes that I wasn't in on, stories I did not understand. It was a language I felt a lot of shame for not speaking. And so this tough guy from CNN is like, learn Russian, kid. I'm like, all right, yeah. That sounded really liberating, actually. Until, of course, I enrolled in Russian 601A. Does anyone know how you say hello in Russian? Yes? Здравствуйте. How do you say it in Spanish? Hola. Okay, big difference. Yes, okay. But I stuck with it. And then in January 1996, never having seen snow fall from the sky in my life, because I'm from South Texas, I jetted off to Moscow. And what a world awaited for me there. The Chechen War was raging, the ruble was falling, and the mafia had infiltrated every aspect of the society, from Beggar's Row to the Kremlin, including my boyfriend. More on him a little later, maybe. And I remember I was once actually, this didn't happen in Moscow, it happened in Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia, but I was out in about 35 below zero. Has anyone ever been in 35 below zero? I don't think it maybe gets that cold in 10, but a couple of you have. Okay, what happens when you spit in 35 below zero? It freezes and it kind of clinks into the ground in the form of an ice cube, okay? Like, what does that do to your nose, your eyes? I mean, your body shuts down in weather that cold. Like, you only have about 15 minutes to be outside with any part of you exposed when it's that cold. And so that cold, I am like scurrying through the street, and suddenly a manhole lifts up in the middle of the street and 4 children run out. Yes. And seeing things like that really quickly made me question, what am I doing here besides taking up space in the metro and buying up the lust of the bread? I quickly realized I had to find a way to justify my life here, justify the space I am taking up in this country, fallen on extremely hard times. But what do? I mean, I was 21 at the time. I was 20 at the time. I was not a pre-med major. I knew nothing about medicine. That could feasibly have been some help. I wasn't a lawyer. I couldn't do anything with law. I wasn't a social worker. I spoke some Russian, but so did all the Russians. So that was not of any help either. I mean, they're really, like, we're talking like no skills, right? Except I was a journalism major. And I was like, okay, great, I can take notes. All right, what help is that? And I was like, I can take notes. Okay, I can take notes. I can really take some notes. I mean, you haven't seen anyone like write quite as quickly as I can, okay? So I started thinking, all right, it's maybe not much, but eventually it became everything. It started off as like a meditative practice. At the end of the day, I would sit on my cot in my dorm in Moscow, and I would think, what did I see today? Okay, that devushka with the fur cap gliding across the ice on her stiletto heels. Okay, that was an arresting sight. Okay, let's write that down. All right, what did I hear today? Okay, the babushki, they were gossiping about something in the metro. Okay, let's write that conversation down. Okay, what did I smell? There's a very particular smell you sometimes come across in Moscow. It's like a little bit vodka, a little bit sausage, and a little bit sweat and tear, right? Okay, so let's get that combo down, right? Okay, like what is the taste in my mouth? Okay, and gradually I began to do that more and more and more. It started off like 10 minutes, just sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. And then that 10 minutes became 20 and 30 and 40, and then before I knew it, I had filled up an entire notebook just with these observations. And then I began to think, oh, well, maybe I could even be more assertive. Maybe I can actually like ask a Russian what they think about what's going on, you know, and like, okay, and then I'll write down everything they say. And it just kind of grew from there. If you had told me that I was writing the first draft of my first book, I mean, that would not have been conceivable to me at the time, not in the realm of possibility. But the more I began to take notes, the more I needed to take notes. I began to, Simone Weil once said, the French mystic Simone Weil once said, attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. And I don't even know if I can claim to have been generous, but it felt like I was doing something, bearing witness with something that I could do. And so I did it with everything that I had. And as I began traveling across, these are the notebooks just from this one time period, just taking a profound amount of notes. As I was doing this, I realized there was one story in particular that I kept hearing time and time again, no matter where I traveled, throughout the former Soviet Union, throughout China, throughout Vietnam, throughout Cuba. And that was this. I kept on encountering individuals who had made these astonishing sacrifices to uphold their culture. When I was in Lithuania, I met a gentleman who spent most of his 20s in prison, being tortured on a ritual basis because he refused to renounce Judaism. When I was in Latvia, I met a woman whose husband died in the gulag because he did not stop publishing poetry in his native tongue. When I was in Tibet, I met monks who kept images of the Dalai Lama hidden beneath the floorboards of their monastery, even though if they were caught, they would be defrocked, they would be exiled from the monastery. And I began to realize all of these people had made these profound sacrifices for their culture. I had totally walked away and abandoned my own. I've learned somehow Russian. I learned somehow some words of Mandarin Chinese. But when I would go home and see my abuelita, I would just sit in silence. That was the first notion that I needed to make a life change. The second was this. I'm going to read to you the introduction from my second book, Mexican Enough. This takes place in 2004. Once, when I was 6, I leaped in front of a moving car. My lip split halfway to my ear. As a surgeon stitched my cheek, I decided motor vehicles are death machines and should be avoided. This is why I live in New York City, subways. On the rare occasion I find myself in the driver's seat, I am haunted by vision of children darting across the road, perhaps images of my former self. I grip the steering wheel at 11 and 1 o'clock, lurching and braking like now. I'm sputtering down I-10 in a 92 Mazda en route from Los Angeles to my parents' house in Corpus Christi. Today is the Tucson-El Paso leg. I veer off the highway onto an isolated farm road curving along the Mexican border and wind up in a desert choked with cactus and brush. But this is my ideal driving scenario. Nobody to hit. The air conditioner has perished, so it's hot as blazes. I roll down the window and contemplate my 30th birthday, which is a month away. My 20s were consumed by my first book, a memoir about traveling around the communist bloc. During the decade it took to research, write, and publish it, I grew keenly aware that I was living backward, more in my past than in my present. It's time to move on, but where? To what? When asked this on my book tour, I had a ready reply: learn Spanish. Despite being third-generation Mexican-American and growing up 150 miles from the border, my Spanish is best described as Tarzan light, a primitive vocabulary spoken entirely in the present tense. My mother faced so much ridicule for her accent growing up, she never taught us to speak it properly. Studies show only 17% of third-generation Mexicans speak Spanish fluently, but it riddles me with guilt, especially now that I've entered the publishing world. I'm literally turning down invitations to speak to groups I supposedly represent because I literally cannot communicate with them. A logical plan would be to venture across this desert and explore the land and the tongue of my ancestors. But the very notion terrifies me. Ask any South Texan. To us, Mexico means kidnappings and shootouts in broad daylight in Nuevo Laredo, or the unsolved murder of young women in Ciudad Juarez. It means narco-traffickers in every cantina, and explosive diarrhea from every comedor. When I was in high school, a college student got snatched off the street while partying down in Matamoros during spring break. Bound and gagged, he was driven to a ranch run by a satanic cult. Next thing you know, he was menudo. One worshiper wore a belt made out of his victims' spinal cords. So go to Mexico? Thanks, but I'd rather return to Moscow and hunt down my old mafiosi boyfriend. I'm cresting a small hill now. Glistening pools of water appear on the road up ahead, then evaporate. It is dizzyingly hot. I glance down at the gas gauge. It's nearly empty. My cell phone is roaming. Not a soul has passed me on this road. If this Mazda breaks down, I am toast. I better turn around and join the main highway. My foot hovers above the brake as I grasp the clutch. And then something appears in the distance. Objects in the middle of the road, moving sluggishly, then quickly. Bear? What kind of bear prowls around the Arizona desert? No, there must be wild dogs standing on their hind legs and running? No, they are people. One figure seems to be a child. My lifelong phantom has actualized. I slam the brakes. They must be Mexicans fleeing the border. I blare the horn. Agua, tengo agua, I scream out the window. They must need water. I have 2 bottles. I must give one to them. But what if water isn't all they need? What if they ask me to take them somewhere? Of course I will say yes. I mean, how can I deny a ride to people in the middle of the desert? But what if they don't just want a lift? What if they want my car? What if they take it, toss me near the cactus and roar away? I mean, that's what I would do if the tables were turned. Throw out the gringa and go. The irony here is immediate. Nearly every accolade I have received in my life, from minority-based scholarships to book contracts, has been at least partly due to this genetic link I share with the people charging through the snake-infested brush. What separates us is a twist of geographical fate that birthed me on one side of the border, them on the other. They are too Mexican. I am just enough. The Mazda has slowed to a crawl, but those border crossers have vanished. Water shimmers where they once stood. As I look off into the desert hills from which they descended, a surprising thought flashes through my mind. I want to go to Mexico, and so I did. So that is what began that journey. It was a journey that lasted a year. It was an incredible year. But I made a sad realization at the end of that year. I really thought that moving to Mexico would turn me into the self-actualized Mexicana that I just knew was inside of me. But no, I came to realize I would never be Mexican, even if I moved there for the duration of my life. Because what binds a people are their childhood stories, their bedtime stories, their poems, their prayers, their shared memory. And mine are not from Mexico. They are from that liminal space between nations. I'm from the borderlands. I'm from La Frontera. I am from a people who walk between worlds. And so that is why I returned to this place that I couldn't escape fast enough when I was in high school. In 2007, in my middle 30s, I returned home. What I found there shocked me. Marginalized communities being poisoned by petrochemical industries and oil refineries, being militarized by the Border Patrol, trafficked by guns, arms, and people, and barricaded by a 670-mile-long wall. So, we're going to spend a moment talking about the border wall. All right. There are many ways to conceive of the border wall. Obviously, Homeland Security being number one, first and foremost on people's minds, especially people who, incidentally, don't actually live anywhere near the border. It seems to be they're the most concerned. People who actually do live in the borderlands, Homeland Security is kind of not even in the top 5, maybe not even in the top 10 of our concerns. Foremost concern tends to actually be property rights, at least in Texas, because most of the border wall is actually built on people's property. Most of Texas is owned by someone, and sometimes these families have had this land in their family for hundreds of years. They actually have titles from the Spanish crown, and they are now being sent cease and desist letters for their land. They're being offered like $2,000 for an acre of this land that's been in their family forever for the wall to go through it. Texans think a lot about the economic disparity of the land, where the wall is always going through poor neighborhoods, through universities, through a local wildlife refuge in South Texas, never ever goes anywhere near country clubs or golf courses. We think about the environmental impact. We think about what it is doing to migratory animals, the ocelot, through snakes, through frogs, which you find them dead besides the wall. Obviously, the level of human rights, which I'll get to in a minute. But since I'm an artist, I looked at it through an artistic lens. So raise your hand if you've actually seen the wall. Like, who's been there? I've spent like intentional time. Okay, some of you have, yeah. Okay, so those of you who have know, the wall actually looks different depending on where you are. It's not a uniform wall. This is what we have in Texas. All right, what do you think? Yeah, into it? Yeah. I'm talking about aesthetically. The aesthetics of this. All right, that's what we have. It has to be painted every couple of years because it's rusting continuously. It was originally black, but it turns rust quite quickly. In the sun, you can actually see footprints and handprints going all the way up and all the way down. These are the walls, the new walls that, that Trump has actually proposed. Do we know how long our wall is currently? It was actually on the other slide. 670 miles, yes, okay. And he wants to add 1,000 miles between 30 and 55 feet high at a rate of about $22 billion. And so these are the aesthetics of the more recent ones. But I'm very interested in how the wall has actually been conceived of as the world's largest canvas by Mexicans. So Mexicans actually see the wall as an opportunity, and it has become an art gallery in many parts of the wall. First of all, actually, when undocumented people who are making the migration across, they often will inscribe their name, take a sharp object and write their name and the date, sometimes even a phone number. So if you see it, you can call and let the family know, like, oh, you made it this far, she made it this far. A lot of politicians will put their campaign posters up. And then you have really amazing works of art, such as this, all on the southern side. This is one of my favorite performance artists, Ana Teresa Fernandez. She has a series I'll show you in a second. So one of the earliest works of border art, border wall art, came from a group called Taller de Arte Fronteriza, the Border Art Workshop in Tijuana. And what they began doing was laying up coffins to memorialize all of the dead. You have to think, you know, the border itself is nearly 2,000 miles long, and it goes through profoundly hot desert. Bodies desiccate very quickly in the border, but yet they find they tend to average about 500 bodies a year. So every year they would make these huge coffins and write the number of bodies that had been found that year. You also see a lot of art of crosses with individual names. This has become a symbol of the migrante. So what does this say? ¿Cuántos más? What does that mean? How many more, right? How many more have to die? So this is a symbol of, you know, people carrying water with them as they're making the crossing. Lots of skulls, and also lots of symbols of hope that you see on the border wall. This artist I really love. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this sign, this symbol right here, but they're called milagros, and this is a tradition that dates back to the Iberian Peninsula. So they're tiny little metal objects, and you buy them. Say if your tío has a heart attack or has a pulmonary problem, you'll get a little tin of a little heart or a tin of little lungs, and you string it with a red ribbon, and you take it to church, and you give it as an act to the santito, the saint of that your uncle is named after, perhaps, or one that he has a special relationship to. So this is how you make a devotional offering. So what this artist did, Alfred Quiros, in Nogales, which is across from Arizona, the border town across from Arizona, he made these massive milagros that are for the immigrant. And so this first one right here, what is that, do you suppose, what does that mean? A coyote. Who are the coyotes? Those are the human smugglers, yes? But notice there's something happening with the tongue of that coyote. Split tongue, right. When I first started reporting on the border about 15 years ago, and I was writing Mexican Enough, it was estimated then that about a third of coyotes would somehow cheat you, meaning usually stiff you of money in some way. Now it's estimated that about 75% of coyotes will somehow cheat you, only instead of stiffing you of money, they now are extorting money, not from you, but from your families back home. They now stage elaborate kidnappings. Women are often abused sexually by coyotes. So they have become quite maniacal, because now there used to be a lot of like freelance independent coyotes, and now almost all of them are minions of the transnational cartels, drug cartels. Another symbol here that's, I think, really moving, these big eyes. So big eyes watching out for the migra, watching out for the Border Patrol. This is the woman who's on the cover of my book, Ana Teresa Fernandez. This is a piece that she did called Borrando la Frontera. What does that mean? Erasing the border, yeah. So what she's done this action several times. This is Martha Stewart blue paint, and she takes it and she paints the pylons of the border wall blue so that they blend in with the skies, so that the border wall disappears. However, you don't find any art on the northern side. Why? Because as soon as you arrive, the Border Patrol comes. I've never been hanging out by the wall more than like 5 minutes before they come. So if you are going to put some art on it, you've got to be super fast. Like Ron English. So Ron English, I'm not sure if you've heard of him. He's one of Banksy's buddies. And he's done big actions on all the border walls that are up, in the Palestinian territories, the Berlin Wall. And so he wheat pasted these two donkeys, burros, pulling in opposite directions on April Fool's Day of 2011. And then he went to the crossing at Tamaulipas and put that sign up. And that sign up was up all day long, and no one did anything besides look at it and like acknowledge it and then walk in. I mean, it was really heartbreaking. Yeah. This is a more recent action. Maybe some of you saw this image by JR, big baby. Okay, this is going to bring me to a piece I'll read to you now. So this artist that I'll talk a little bit about, I'll do a reading from, is actually a friend of mine. Her name is Susan Arbage Page. And every year for the last 10 years, what she has done is walk along the Rio Grande, of course, the river that separates Texas from Mexico. And she's looking for the objects that people leave behind as they make the crossing, either because they are running and they drop it, or because the Border Patrol makes them drop it in the ground. And what she does is she photographs them exactly as she sees them in situ, and then she takes them and puts them in a big bag emblazoned with La Virgen de Guadalupe, who is the patron saint of Mexico. That's sort of her devotional offering to these objects. And she brings them back home. Home for her is Durham, North Carolina. And then she photographs them again in her studio. And then when she does her art exhibition, she displays the two photos side by side. It's quite moving. She calls these objects the anti-archive, the unofficial history of immigration, the one that nobody wants to look at or deal with. So I will read a brief excerpt of Hanging Out with Susan on the Border. And this is from All the Agents and Saints. Hidalgo stretches along the banks of the Rio Grande. Earthen levees have long held its floodwaters at bay, but a few years ago, some were replaced by walls that serve the dual purpose of flood control and border security. These walls are the ugliest I have seen. Miles of concrete slabs teethed in tall steel posts that preside over the green like a cubist sentry. We find the hiking trail leading to the wall, but what should be a 5-minute walk takes us nearly 30. The trail is practically paved with objects. Here's one, Susan says, stopping mid-stride and reaching for her camera. I peek over her shoulder to find a toothbrush at her feet, whole and blue. A red one missing its bristles lies a few inches away, along with a broken hair clip. This means it's really active, she says. Next is a purple shirt tangled in weeds. As she grabs one end and pulls, a Border Patrol vehicle drives by. Its back end is outfitted with a holding cell, something a dog catcher might use. Before I can mention it, Susan says, "Whoa, look at that," and bounds over to a Macy's bag, half hidden in a clump of grass. A pair of Wrangler Originals tumbles out, then a long-sleeve shirt, and then finally a handsome belt with a buckle shaped like a longhorn. She examines the jeans. Size 32 by 30, made in China, and they're still wet. That's probably why they're here, she speculates. Over the years, she has learned that the Border Patrol does not allow immigrants to bring anything wet aboard their vehicles because there's no way to dry clothes at the station. Belts are also not permitted, lest they be used as weapons. Same with shoelaces, same with hairbrushes, same with toothbrushes. Bras are often a sign of rape, she says. Coyotes will hang them on a tree afterward, like a trophy. Homemade flotation devices usually mean a baby's been brought across. Sometimes you find religious cards on the bank of the river, and you know someone left them there, and thanks for a safe passage. You see caffeine pills, and so they can stay awake during the journey. We continue down the trail. Toothbrush, toothbrush, shoelace, shoelace, a water bottle squished, a tennis shoe, half of a comb, most of a shirt, nail clippers, another shirt, a lacy black bra. Susan and I halt mid-step. A lacy black bra. It isn't dangling from a tree, but it is a lacy black bra. When this expedition began a few days ago, it felt like a most peculiar egg hunt. But as La Virgen began to fill, I started to see, as Susan does, the objects as reliquaries, the journey as pilgrimage. But the vulnerability of his bra curled in the dirt renders the trail into a crime scene. No woman abandons her lacy black bra unless she is forced to, unless she has surrendered the entirety of her attention. Scattered nearby are 2 pairs of panties, a wallet, a travel-size speed stick, a pocket-sized Bible, Nuevo Testamento, a packet of Trident chewing gum, and a light blue handkerchief. The relief I feel from this additional discovery, maybe a Border Patrol agent made her drop everything, as opposed to a coyote ripping off that one thing, gives way to the dread of imagining a woman walking around without these items. Nothing here is irreplaceable, but the woman who packed these items did so with care. Her bra looks almost new. Her panties are still folded. So often in our culture, we are the sum of our possessions. Indeed, at times, they seem our only markers of our passage through this world. What does it mean to pare them down to the barest essential, and then to lose even those? A siren goes off. Commotion ensues in the near distance. We quicken our pace as a Border Patrol vehicle pulls up from behind. A Tejano agent sticks out his head. He informs us 60 bodies have been found up ahead. Bodies? I ask, envisioning a pile of corpses. We got 2 of them. The rest went back to Mexico. Where are you ladies heading? Susan tells her story, then asks if we can walk down by the river. Sí, pero... He looks at me. Pero peligroso? I ask. But it's dangerous. Pues sí. He rolls up the window. We hurry on until we see 3 Border Patrol vehicles idling by the wall. One is outfitted with the container cell I noticed earlier. A female agent walks out, steps around back, and opens the door of the cell. Susan and I freeze in place as a 40-ish man with an Olmec nose steps out. He's wearing a white shirt and jeans. He pauses to look at Susan and me before stepping inside the awaiting vehicle. My hand instinctively rises and waves. What I mean by this is hard to articulate, but something like, you are here and I am here, the way our ancestors have always been here, but now you are being taken away from here while I still get to stand here, and I am bearing witness to the injustice of that, and I am sorry. I watch the man get swallowed inside the dark of the windows and search for a place to rest his gaze. At one point, he seems to be looking at me. For half a second, I wonder whether or not to wave again. And then he beats me to it. So, this is what you see when you're walking across the border, and you're walking along the Rio Grande. I mean, this man has lost profoundly important documents to his safety, to his security. He's lost his wallet, he's lost his identification. The worst of all, perhaps, he's lost the phone numbers of whoever he was going to call when he makes it across. I mean, what is he going to do? Okay, you've learned a little bit about it. What happened at the scene? What just happened? Can you tell? What happened here? Border Patrol, why are you saying Border Patrol? Because they're all in one area. What else is a telltale sign that the Border Patrol made someone take everything off? Shoelaces and the belt, yes. So when you see the shoelaces, you know, like shoelaces immediately has to come off, belt immediately has to come off. So this is someone who was apprehended by the Border Patrol. You see bras. This is what Susan takes everything in, the bag of Virgen de Guadalupe. And this is when she does photographs the objects again when she gets to her studio. How expensive is the border wall? About the cheapest section of it's about $4 million a mile, and it goes up to $23 million a mile because it's different every, wherever it is, it's always someplace different. But that's, so averaging a good, $15 million a mile. How much do you suppose that ladder cost to make? Those ladders are the Border Patrol gathers ladders all day, every day. They pile them up and they burn them. And then there's another crop the next day, another crop the next day. This is what we're using very medieval technology and getting over it with even older technology. Actually, what comes first, the wall or the ladder? I don't know. That's a good existential question. Maybe they came around the same time. This is my buddy Mark Clark, and he re-envisions images of migration through old Aztec glyphs. This is La Bestia. This is the train that takes Central Americans use to get across Central America and through Mexico. This is a really controversial series that he has called Moonlit Mojada, Mojada meaning wetback. So you can see kind of a scantily clad lady distracting the border patrol so her buddies can climb the wall behind. And it says, Saludos desde el otro lado, greetings from the other side. This is one of my favorite artists on the border. His name is Rigoberto Gonzalez, and I call him the Caravaggio of the borderlands. So can we darken the lights by any chance? Is that possible, just for a second? Is that possible, so you can see what's going on here? Can you see what's going on here? Yeah, you can see, okay. Yeah, so this is really intense. All of his work is life-size, so you are seeing a head the size of your head. And that is all that is there. This is a reference to La Familia Michoacana. This is a cartel that sort of announced the drug war in Mexico in 2005 by going into a nightclub in Michoacan with a gunny sack full of 5 severed human heads and rolled them onto the dance floor. It's an image from that. He does images. Does anyone recognize what this is representing? A very famous painting. Yes, Perseus and Medusa by Cellini, yes. So, except this is a mujer zeta decapitated by the Gulf Cartel. This is La Guia, the guide, so crossing the border, crossing the Rio Grande. This is probably the size of this entire back wall. This is a massive, massive painting. And this is right at the moment, right after a major gun battle in Reynosa. And there's a lot of religious imagery in here. We can see this right here, making the sign of the cross, the La Pieta. So this is sort of like the mother and the son. Here we have Pedernales, and there are 12 of them, sort of an apostolic 12. Here we have the narco corrido already being composed even as it's taking place. There's a whole genre of music about the narco cartels called narco corrido. Also, in all of his work, he has someone breaking the fourth wall, looking directly at you. In this case, this woman right here, and that is Rigoberto's way of saying that you are complicit in this. We, as people from the United States, if you do any form of drug that you did not personally grow in your backyard, you are complicit in this. Every gram of cocaine that is brought into this country, every gram of heroin, every joint that comes from Mexico, someone died bringing it here, most likely. We're all involved. We're all complicit in this. This is my friend Celeste Luna. Her image is called Compass, north, south, east, and west. This right here is Santa Muerte. She's the patron saint of the drug cartels. And there's the wall. Breach Baby. Caught Between Worlds. This is another really close friend of mine. You'll meet her in the book, Santa. She makes a big image of the Virgen de Guadalupe every year in Kingsville, Texas. Okay. So, do you want another excerpt from Texas, or shall we travel 100 miles to north? How are we doing on time? Do you have time to... We're good on time? Yeah, okay. How long? 10 more? Okay, well, let's see. I've got a little more than 10 minutes ahead of you. Okay. But if we are getting close, so literally, what time? 15 minutes? Okay, cool. All right, so I'm going to do one reading that's a hard reading, hard to do, hard to hear. And I'm doing it because we need to understand the reality of what's happening at the wall, what's happening as a result of our immigration policy, and that is border death. I happen to be with Brooks County is about 90 miles north of the border. It's just one county in Texas. And the ranches in Brooks County have become a graveyard because migrants aren't aware, I think, I think that when they're making the crossing, they're mostly concerned about getting across the actual physical border into the United States. What they maybe aren't quite as aware of is the fact that there are many checkpoints beyond the original crossing, and there's a huge one at Farfurias, which is 90 miles north of the border. And so, it's so traumatizing to make the initial crossing. And when you're finally in the United States, maybe you're kind of like letting your guard down a little bit, and you're like, oh, I made it, and now I just need to get to the city where I'm going, and I'll reunite with my family, and then things will be better. But in fact, maybe what they don't realize is that when they get to Falfurrias, they have to stop generally about 31 miles before they get to that post, and then they have to walk around the entire circumference of 30 miles because the Border Patrol spans out 30 miles into the brush looking for people. So they have to walk all the way around that. Falfurrias tends to be about 110 degrees, and the soil is loamy, and it's sandy, and you sort of sink into it, and many, many people don't make it across. And I just so happened to be in the sheriff's department. When they got in, they call them Code 500s when they hear that someone's been found. Also worth noting is that every single one of these deaths is cataloged in a binder called the Dead Book. And under cause of death, for every single solitary one of them, it says, hiking through ranch illegally. The undertaker arrives on the scene. This is, I forgot to mention, I'm there with the sheriff when they get a call in, and he looks at me and says, you got a weak stomach? And invited me to go on a retrieval. The undertaker arrives on the scene. He's an older man with a slender build. He carries a white bedsheet and a large cardboard box. Breaking through our imaginary railing, he walks right up to the woman's feet, sets down his parcels, and slides on a pair of blue rubber gloves. He briskly searches her pockets, inches from the beetle pit. He finds dollar bills, a 20, a 5, 3 ones. He piles these atop the woman's thigh. Next, he pulls out an LG cell phone. He wipes it clean. Running his fingers along her bri line, he checks to see if anything is tucked inside. An ID, maybe, a list of phone numbers. There is nothing. Now comes the task of slipping the woman into the bag. He unfurls the sheet. He lays it out beside her. Ultimately, it must go beneath her. Carefully, he rolls the woman onto her side. That makes her scalp fall off, hair and all, with a strangely soupy sound. She has become liquid. All of her is leaking and dripping. The undertaker catches her scalp and swiftly slides it back into place, as though assisting a lady with an errant wig. While the rest of us stand and stare, Davila bounds over to help. They push the sheet beneath her and roll her back on top. She's small, Davila announces, probably Guatemalan or Honduran. The two men swaddle her in the sheet, half bones, half stew, and stuff her into a black body bag with golden zippers. Davila, the sheriff, and the Border Patrol agent fan out 30 feet and scan the brush for approximately half a minute before heading back to their respective truck. There is no obvious evidence in sight. We leave behind only an empty water bottle and a host of beetles. No words are spoken. No rights are given. Over the ford, Davila wipes his shoes on a patch of Huizache. Gotta make sure there's no bodily fluid on me, because it'll stink, he explains. We notice the undertaker struggling with the gurney. Davila hurries over. Together they prop it open, lay the body bag on top, strap it down, lift it up, and roll it into the back of the van. Davila introduces me to the undertaker. His name is Angel, pronounced Angel the Tejano way. I want to say how fitting and applaud his professional graces. But before I can speak, Davila tells him I am a writer. Angel shakes his head. A lot of people write stories, he says. Nothing ever gets done. I hear this a lot. It never fails to shatter me. But I usually brush it off with a self-deprecating remark and a smile. But there's just something about standing in the woods with a 3-day dead woman and 95-degree heat that gives me the audacity to hope that maybe, just maybe, something will change this time. Congress will change, minds will change, policy will change, and a humane immigration law will finally be enacted. And although that hope vaporizes into idealistic mist before I can even articulate it, there remains a spark of optimism that, by virtue of being written about, this Code 500 might be remembered. That even if we never learn her name, or whether she's Guatemalan or Honduran, or for all we know Chinese, This one member of the 34 who died before her and the 94 who will die after her, this single year in this solitary county of this one state could be memorialized inside of a story. And at the very least, I will remember her. This woman who hiked illegally through this ranch and got annihilated for it. I will remember what remained of her feet and of her face when I try to fall asleep at night as it rung on hell to hope this counts as something getting done. I wish to say this. I wish to say all of this and so much more. But there is time only to feebly smile before Angel retreats to the driver's seat, where he removes a pair of badly soiled gloves. He already knows he will be back tomorrow, and I will not. Meanwhile, 2,200 miles north, amazingly, after spending 7 years working on this book, I got a job, something I hadn't had in about a decade, at St. Lawrence University. And it was amazing to get this job because when I looked on the map to see where St. Lawrence University might be located, it turned out to be 18 miles south of the Canadian border. Before arriving here, I didn't think the northern borderlands could differ more starkly from the one where I grew up. Temperatures, for starters, tend to be 60 degrees apart. South Texas feels like a large wet dog sitting on your face. The heat and humidity are that oppressive. The North Country is more like a cat hissing and scratching you. It is that visceral, that persistent, that extreme. And yet the hot boil of the sun and the raw freeze of the snow affect me the same way. Both make me retreat inward. And when I step into the car and in 20 minutes reach a bridge, it requires a passport to cross and descends into a shockingly different economic strata, I realize I've been here once before. And when I learn that a nearby community is rallying to deify an ancestor, a saint, and those very same people are also battling poverty, obesity, and industrial waste, I realize I will once again be caught in the suspension of disbelief. And when I read about people getting arrested for smuggling aliens by speedboat and drugs by snowmobile, I realize I am once again living on an edge. In other words, when I stare around this remote new world, I realize I am home. Border runs right through this backyard. This border, 5,000 miles long border. It runs right through this bar, known as a halfway house. And for a long time, there was a piece of tape on it. And if you were under 21, you would drink on the Canadian side. And if you were over, you could drink on the U.S. side. Average crossing time, 5 minutes. Not bad. Unless you're Mohawk. Then it takes between 25 minutes and 3 hours. So we have the wall down south. They have a bridge up north. This is the bridge that causes an incredible amount of frustration, anger, oppression in the Mohawk Nation of Akwesasne. Let me share why. Okay, so this is Akwesasne. That's New York. Okay, so it's that dot right up there. And as you can see right here, it is divided. Sits on the border of Canada and the United States, also Ontario and Quebec, and also all of these different counties, which is why for a very long time there was a sign that hung at the gate of Akwesasne. Let me just read you the sign. Welcome to Akwesasne. While a visitor to our community, you will be under the jurisdiction of the following: Canada, the United States, the Mohawk Nation, the St. Regis Mohawk Tribal Council, the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, New York, Ontario, Quebec, Huntington County, Franklin County, St. Lawrence County, the New York State Police, the Mohawk Police, the Quebec Police Force, the Ontario Provincial Police, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, US Border Patrol, Canadian Customs, US Customs, and coming soon, the National Guard. Drive carefully. Have a nice day. Yeah. So that is what they are dealing with. Land of the Partridge Drums. They are a sovereign nation. You see signs attesting such everywhere you go. They're a member of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which is in English known as the Iroquois Confederacy. Idle no more is a reference to a big Indigenous movement that passed in Canada while I was living there. They're never idle there. They've been living in a state of resistance for about 400 years. So these are signs that you see. I just took this picture and actually just in April, so they're always switching out the signs. I'm going to close my reading with a reading about the Longhouse. So a big part of this book project was, just seeing, this is a heartbreaking book to report. Constantly seeing images of really horrendous images, seeing a lot of images of death, seeing images of oppression, seeing the legacy of colonialism for these colonized people, both in Texas and in the Mohawk Nation. How do people survive? How do people get by? How do they endure? They endure because they have an exceptionally deep tie to the other world, to the mystical world, to their faith. And faith, actually, in both communities, often takes the form of Catholicism. And then the Mohawks, of course, have their original belief system, spiritual life, which is called the Longhouse. And that's divided into 13 ceremonies for the 13 moons. And these are the different ceremonies they celebrate. And one of the great honors of my life was actually I was invited to participate in the strawberry ceremony. This is what a Longhouse looks like, just so you have a visual image. This was traditionally used in times of war. So all the families, all the kids and the women would be in the center. In the original Longhouse, they didn't even have windows. And then the warriors would be on the side and they could fight, so their families were safe inside. And now this is the place of their spiritual life. And the only thing you need to know before this brief excerpt I'm going to read is this right here, which means, it says, Ahon do Galewadegwa, which stands for the words that come before all else. The words that come before all else in the Mohawk pantheon are gratitude, thank you. And they say words of thanks before every meeting of consequence. And this is what it's like inside the ceremony. There is singing, there is dancing, there is chanting, and often all three at once. Two men keep the rhythm with rattles made of turtle shells while the rest of us dance in a long procession around the room. At first, I try to follow the footwork of the woman in front of me, but gradually realize people, they're moving to their own internal beat. I do as well, relishing in the freedom. At one point, someone grabs my hand. I look down to find a girl who can't be more than 4, staring up at me with unblinking eyes. She's wearing a little white sundress embroidered with strawberries. Her silky black hair is parted into pigtails. She seems to want me to lead her. So I do, clasping her small hand in my own. Together we travel round and around the Longhouse, along with 30, then 40, then 60 others. Someone makes a sound like yee-oh! The rest of us respond in turn. An hour into the ceremony, my friend Kita exits the Longhouse. I trail behind. Next door is an industrial-sized kitchen where women are preparing the day's feast, pulping piles of strawberries and sliding them into a bucket of water. Kita stations me with her Ishta, her mother, who's making corn mush at the stove. She shows me how to whisk the corn flour and water together until they take on a cream of wheat sheen, then how to add in the strawberries and maple syrup. Has Kita told you about Sky Woman, she asks. I recite the stories that I have heard, how Sky Woman fell from the sky one day, landed on the back of a turtle, and walked about sprinkling sky dirt that became earth dirt beneath her feet. Ishta nods approvingly, then adds another legend to my library. Sky Woman's husband often tried to test her resolve. Once, he asked her to make corn mush without wearing any clothes. See how it's bubbling? Ishta asks. I glance down to discover the mush pot has become a lava pit. A giant bubble bursts, singeing my hand with splatter. I yelp and lower the flame. Ishta laughs. That's what Sky Woman's husband wanted to know, if she could endure the pain. What else do strawberries signify, I ask. You see its color? That represents the blood of the woman. Pointing at the mush, she adds, when you cut a strawberry in half, that also represents the woman. It grows the closest to the ground, so it's the closest to the earth, which is the mother. That makes it feminine, too. The strawberry is medicine for the woman. Years ago, I helped my friend Rochelle organize a menstruation celebration for teenage girls in Corpus Christi. We delighted over her idea to serve strawberry shortcake with red fruit punch. But when I shared this idea with my friends, they thought it kinky. So it is gratifying to learn that Rochelle's instinct was right. Strawberries really do symbolize the feminine, and they have been celebrated as such by the Haudenosaunee since time immemorial. After lunch, we dance again. As the turtle rhythms pound a rhythm into my brain, I feel increasingly elated. Men emit their yee-oh. Footwork gets fancy. Sweat trickles down our face. Someone whoops, someone hollers, not for a god, not for a prophet, for a berry. Something that leaves behind sustenance instead of commandments. Something that offers a single interpretation. Plant, water, harvest me, I will return. Poison me, I won't. One song ends, another begins. More rattles, different rhythms. Round and around the longhouse we go, drinking the symbolic blood of woman, eating the gifts of sky woman. Another whoop, another holler. Euphoria swirls through the procession. The chanting stops and starts again. New song, new rhythm. Same motivation, the valiant strawberry. To say that you almost tasted strawberries is to say that you narrowly avoided death. The skyway above is lined with the fruit. You can pick as many as you want from the patches. Hours pass, days, then all too soon the music ends. A final whoop, a last yee-oh. We clamber back into the bleacher. The chief removes the wampum hanging on a nearby stand. He holds it to his heart. Again, we are treated to the ahondu galewadegwa, the words that come before all else. We thank Earth Mother, the waters, the fish, the plants, the animals, the trees. We thank the four winds and the thunders, the sun, Grandmother Moon, the stars, the enlightened teachers. We thank the people. We thank the Creator. These are the words that come before all else. Ahondu galewadegwa. Gratitude. Thank you. So I understand there's some T-shirts and like questions, and that is a cool combo. All right. If you need to leave, go, and then we can, whoever else can stay, we can chat a bit. And thank you so much to those who came and are running away. Thank you.
Hello.
Did that work?
Okay. Hi. Thank you so much. It is just so wonderful to have you here with us tonight. And reading your work makes me feel both joyful and inadequate. So thank you so much for that. You spoke about these borders almost as bookends, and that's what I want to ask about. It was really the bookend to my day. So we're here tonight in the evening part, but the morning, the first thing I see when I wake up is someone I know has written a piece. He's Canadian and lives in the UK and is a colleague in my field, and with a really provocative headline. And the gist of it is that if you want your country to be ethnically pure, you are racist. But if you want to slow immigration so as not to disrupt the ethnicity and nationhood by having large numbers of people come in, it's only racist if you hate them. So that's the morning. And then the evening, you talk about traveling around the world and having people who will sacrifice anything to uphold their culture. I'm just trying to make sense of these two things coming together and was wondering how you might do the same.
Wow. I mean, I guess the first mental image that popped into my brain was New York City, actually. I mean, I actually moved to New York City just 2.5 weeks after 9/11, and I was, wow. I mean, that was such a time. And so, if anyone felt the pain of what had just happened, if anyone felt 9/11, it was all of these New Yorkers and Manhattanites. Yet they were the first people to take up signs and protest the bombing and all the carnage that followed. And so the similar thing with the border, right? The people that probably if we're thinking about security, their security is most at stake, and they're the people that want the wall the least. I think that to me, it's the blending and the respecting and the celebration of cultures, and the world cultures that we have, the cities that we have, where all communities are coming together and living in a sort of a peaceful coexistence and learning and celebrating one another. Those are the countries that I want to be in. So that's that, and I think that's one of the marvels of a university as well. I mean, I hope that all of you are appreciating that, the fact that you are living this kind of. I mean, obviously there are lots of concerns that are happening, and this is a typical time on campuses as well. But just this is what it is. It's all of us coming together in earnest and open dialogue. I think that's the only way I see forward in this really, really tragic time right now. Thank you. I tend to be terribly inarticulate after doing my reading, so I do apologize for that. It's like there's too much going on in my brain right now. But I hope that was somewhat, maybe not terribly helpful. I would love another question. Yes?
Hello. So I'm about to graduate.
Oh, congratulations.
And something that I've been thinking a lot about is just like how to use my gifts. And so one, just thank you for using yours well. And just curious, how have you seen the fruit of your writing? Like what are do you have any cool examples of stories?
Oh, that is such a beautiful question. I mean, this is what I live. Okay, actually, I'm going to take a long answer to your question because I actually have a couple more slides. And so bear with me. There is a point to what I'm about to share with you. Okay. So there is an aspect of the Borderlands that I didn't have time to talk about tonight. Because there's so many aspects of it, but a huge one is actually the profound pollution that you see in the Borderlands. So my hometown, Corpus Christi, we're surrounded by 15 miles of Sitco, Valero, and Flint Hills. This is the landscape, and it's our poorest communities. And actually, these poorest communities didn't just move there because they were poor. They were actually zoned there. There was a meeting by the city council in Corpus Christi in the 1940s. Called What to Do with the Negroes, and they decided they're going to move the Negroes here to where they were building industry. And the same thing happened with Tejanos. Tejanos were moved, but we're an area with oil waste pits. Same thing in Akwesasne. Akwesasne is surrounded by 3 Superfund sites, Alcoa, GM, and Reynolds, and for 30 years they dumped all their PCB-laden waste into the river where Mohawks once fished. They used to be fishermen traditionally. They were fishermen. So one of the major commonalities that our communities have are these unexplained rates of cancers that are through the roof, asthma, birth defects. So I write quite a lot about that in All the Agents and Saints. So my book came out last year. I planned an enormous book tour because what gives me more joy than anything, I'm starting to answer your question, what gives me more joy than anything is sharing what I do. I mean, I love this work. There's literally nothing I'd rather do than share my work. I love it with all of my heart. And I was so excited to go on this book tour. And I booked about 30 cities and just so many events. And I was about 2 weeks into the tour, just so elated that I finally could do the part that I really love. When I started having weird indigestion, and which kind of strange, but it also kind of made sense because I was like, going out at like midnight and having a big Mexican, meal and like drinking a margarita the size of my head, and so you're gonna get an indigestion if you do that, But it was like every night, like weird indigestion, and then I get acid reflux, and I was like, what's going on? And then one morning before I flew back to North Carolina, which is where I live now, to like pack and repack and head out again, I started bleeding, and I was like, oh, whoa, and not blood as it should have been, and so I went to the doctor. And she put her hand on my belly, and she did that, which that's never a good sign. And she said, any chance you're pregnant, Stephanie? And I'm with a woman, so I'm like, nope. And she's like, are you sure? And I'm like, I'm Catholic, so it's never like totally off. Maybe. Okay, maybe I am, let's just see. But alas, my ovary had indeed grown something, and it had grown something large. It had grown a tumor the size of a basketball that occupied my entire abdominal cavity. It was ovarian cancer. And so instead of going on my book tour, I spent my entire last fall in UNC hospital undergoing chemotherapy. So this is, and it's quite an amazing thing to be told that you have cancer. And certainly for about a weekend, I was told on a Thursday, it was like complete body shock. But once the body shock began to wear off, I will tell you, and I really want you to hear me when I say this, what I then experienced was the deepest, most profound sense of euphoria I have ever experienced in my life. And do you know why I felt that? Because I knew if this went badly, I lived the life I wanted to live. All I've ever wanted to do is travel and to write, and that is all I fucking did. That's all I spent, that's all I did. I spent all of my 20s and all of my 30s being seemingly completely irresponsible, like not having a job, not getting married, not having a kid, not doing anything that you're supposed to do. I just did what I wanted to do. And at that moment where I thought it could all go down now, I was so grateful that I had made the decisions that I'd made. So please, you students, hear me. Please at least try the path that you really, really want. Just try. Just try. You can always run off and be irresponsible, but at least try. Because it's like, I don't know, like a whole American system is set up like we are supposed to all pretend we're going to be 80. We may not make it to 80. It could have ended for me at 43. And if I had done all the things that I thought I was supposed to do, I never would have lived, and it would have been over, and that would have sucked. Okay? So that is the joy I think I get, is just I lived the life that I wanted to live, which is love. Yay. Okay. Anyway, that's cheesy, but I mean, how cute is that llama, right? Okay. Okay. Next question.
So like many social justice issues in Texas, immigration is very divided, with many people strongly against immigration and many people strongly for it. How do you propose to bring works like your book to the populations who don't support immigration?
I mean, I will talk with any group that asks me to come. I have had, I definitely do have a lot of haters in my audience, people that are not, but they don't, I think that anyone can feel the humanity of these stories. And so my goal with this book was to write hoping would be called a testimonio. Testimonio is a style of writing that developed, it has a very long history in Latin America, but especially became vibrant in the 60s and the 70s. So it's this idea of telling witness. And so my goal with this was to maintain everyone's dignity and just really, really try, because we never actually learn about the borderlands, the people that live on the border. We only learn about it from the politicians that are making policy from someplace so terribly, terribly, terribly far away. And so my goal with this was just to have the pure story and somehow take that into the world, so people can have a sense of what it's actually like to be there. How successful am I in this? I don't know. If you have any ideas for me, I would love to hear them. But yes, these are difficult times, no doubt. And I have aunts and uncles that are second, third generation Mexican and are in support of Ted Cruz, and it's these are difficult times. These are difficult times. His main platform is immigration right now. Next question. Who wants a T-shirt? Yes.
Hello. I'm Casey. I'm also Catholic. So when I saw the title of your book, I had to do a double take because it seems to reference the Confiteor prayer,
it does,
which is a confession of sins. And so it's, for those who don't know, it's asking all the angels and saints and you, my brothers and sisters, to pray for me to the Lord our God. And so it's a confession.
Yeah.
And so I guess one of the things I was wondering about in one of my courses, Voices of the Delta, we've been talking a lot about reconciliation and reckoning and forgiveness. And so I suppose with this book, with the confession, how do you conceive of this confession? Is it your confession? Is it a confession of some people in America? And do you have any idea of how that would play into a reconciliation or reckoning?
Oh, that is a really moving question. Thank you for asking that. Actually, that's how the title came about. I only had really lame titles for this book. For a long time, it was called Border Woman. I mean, that's really an awful title. So I only had bad titles for this book. And then one day I was actually typing out the Confutor, and I made a typo. And instead of saying all the angels and saints, I wrote all the agents and saints. And I looked back, and then I had to get a bodily reaction, like, yeah, yeah. There's the title. It was amazing. Yes. And so initially I was thinking about it in terms of the extremes of the protectorates of the border. So you have agents on one end and the saints on the other, and we're constantly being pulled from, and that is how people tend to go, like, who can we trust? Are we going to be, calling in on the government officials and the militarization? Is that what's going to protect us, or is it going to be the Santitos up in the heavens, and is that going to be who protects us? That's how I initially conceived of it. But then the word agent is amazing, right? Who has agency? Who does not have agency? Then there's the Confutor and the confessions of it, and and it is like all the sins in the Catholic faith, and Catholicism really runs the book. So it's like the perfect title. But yeah, anyway. But yes, I love that question. I do make a lot of confessions in the book, confessions of lies I've told, confessions of, yes. I thank you for asking me this question, and I need to conceive of that in that regard. And I think that, and the act of interviewing can also be that as well. I think that, I don't know if you've ever done a confession face-to-face with a priest. And if there are any Catholics here, I highly recommend it, actually. It's a really amazing experience to do a face-to-face confession. I feel like I made a really deep connection in my spiritual path that I had never had before. So I felt like I really felt true penance trying to meet someone in the eye and share this. And then I began to think that this is something I should do often, because this is actually what I'm asking people that I'm interviewing to do. And I ask a lot of the people that I interview. I really want them to go deep into their interior and share it. And I receive it as a gift. And so I thought that was a good empathy exercise for me as an interviewer as well. So maybe we all need to confess. and receive, and from that liberate. Yeah, beautiful question. Who else wants to share?
Hi, my name is Zara, and thank you so much for coming. That was incredible.
Thank you.
You kind of just touched on this in the answer of your last question, but I was wondering, whenever you're approaching people for interviews, both the local authorities and people who may feel threatened by the local authorities, I was wondering how you approach people with empathy so that they feel that they can share with you.
Yeah. So, yes, I was lucky. I mean, I've interviewed people all over the world in so many different situations, and it's really rare people say no. People almost always say yes. I'm not interested in interviewing people that have been interviewed many times. So earlier in my career, I kind of started getting on the celebrity journalism track, and I was just like, you know what? And there was another period where I wrote about politicians. I interviewed George Bush a couple of times, and I'm like, that is not interesting to me. I want to interview people who have never, ever been interviewed, because that is when I feel like that's when you're really doing something that, in my own way of thinking, that's when you get the real stories, and they're not as guarded, and they really share, and it becomes this incredible experience. I've made really deep, meaningful friendships with many of the people that I've interviewed over the years. And so for this particular book, it was relatively easier for me to get interviews in South Texas because I'm from there and I kind of speak the language. And even though people never think I'm from South Texas, even though I'm like, dude, where are you from? I'm like, here. No one ever believes me. But anyway, but just, but I went to Carroll. I just usually start talking about high school and they're like, okay, yeah, you're from here. Whataburger, Selena. I'm like, anyway, so I started doing my little Selena bit, and they're like, okay, you're from here. Anyway, But the Mohawk Nation was more interesting. The Mohawk, that's actually probably the most difficult writing situation I've put myself in, because I felt like I had no right to be there. And I had no right to be there, and nothing good has ever come to a Native nation from allowing an outsider in, ever. Only hardship and sadness and smallpox have come from that. So, so when I realized that Akwesasne, I actually knew of Akwesasne. Has anyone here seen the film Frozen River? It is an amazing film. I think it's on Netflix. It's by a director named Courtney Hunt. Write it down. It is really, really, it's a powerful film. And it is about human smuggling across the St. Lawrence River. But it's a feature film. Melissa Leo is in it, and she got nominated for an Oscar. I mean, it's an incredibly powerful movie. And when I realized that I was going to be living within 40 minutes of this backdrop for this movie, I'm like, oh my God, I am going to start going. And so, and I kind of approached it like an anthropologist. Like, you know, the nation is 26,350 acres. And that's a possible ground to cover in a year. And there's a definitive start and end to the nation. And there's a lot of smoke shops. And a lot of just different, you know, businesses and things. And so I thought, all right, I'll just start with the first one, and then hopefully by the end of the year I'll have made it to the end. So I just I'm just going to walk into each one, and so I did. And I only had to do a couple before like other things began happening, and then, you know, people just started inviting me places. But the first one, I just went in, and it was a smoke shop, and I noticed a couple of things, like in addition to all the cigarettes, you know, I don't really smoke, so I was like, how am I going to be able to hang out here without buying cigarettes? But fortunately, they also sold newspapers, and then even more importantly, there were a couple of chairs there, and so I was like, hey, and I try not to lie when I interview, but I did lie then. I was like, hey, I'm meeting a friend in an hour. Do you mind if I just like hang out here and read the paper? And she's like, yeah, sure. So I bought the paper and I bought a drink and I sat down, and then I got out a piece of paper and pretended I was like writing something down in the newspaper. What I'm really doing is like looking around like, what's going on, you know? Anyway, and then gradually start talking with her, and then I identify myself as I'm from a border nation as well, and then that's like how we started talking, you know? And then very quickly I identify myself, oh, I'm here because I'm a writer, I'm from the border as well, you know, it's really messed up where I'm from, you know, we got Border Patrol, da-da-da-da, and like I talk for maybe 3 seconds, and then she's like, oh yeah, we got that too, and then she starts telling me her story, and then she's like, you should talk to my mom, and I'm like, can I? Let's go find her, you know? and then, you know, anyway, so the kind of journalism I do, like the goal is to, you know, get invited, like my ultimate goal is to like, for you to take me home and like I get to hang out on your couch like, indefinitely, you know? And it's amazing how many people invite me home and to hang out on their couch. Like, it happens all around the world, all the time. It's amazingly easy to do what I do. But you do have to, it's no joke, it takes over your life. But it becomes a very meaningful, joyful life, I have found. Yeah. One more question before we go. Oh, yes.
Hey, hello. So mine isn't as much as a question as much as I want to hear about something. So you mentioned really briefly in the beginning your journey with Spanish and how you didn't speak it for a while. Yeah. And as someone who, I think we spoke about this, how I like repressed that part of my culture for so long. And I want to know how you kind of navigated that in-betweenness and that like borderland.
Thank you so much for asking that. Yeah, language is such a, that was a really key part of this whole journey. Wow, so I've tried multiple times in my life to learn Spanish, and it was so not happening for me because I felt that everything I said was an admission of what more I couldn't say. So every word was like, but I say this imperfectly, and every word was like, but I could have chosen a more sophisticated word, but I didn't because I don't know it, so therefore I'm just using this lame, silly word. And it was just to the point where like I wouldn't say anything. Even though like I had some idea of what to say, I just wouldn't use it because I was so embarrassed with my accent, I was embarrassed by the choice of vocabulary, I was embarrassed by everything. Conversely, when I learned Russian, I mean, I just learned one word. I remember like the first word I learned how to say was, you know, hello, and it took me like a month to learn how to say it. But when I finally did, I was in a grocery store and I happened to hear people speaking Russian. I ran up to them. I was like, "Здравствуйте!" You know, and they're like, you know, looked at me, and then they were like, and I like ran away because that's all I knew how to say. But I was just so proud to say it. So like every word I learned how to use in Russian was like a victory, and I was so happy to use it. And like and I knew many more words in Spanish, but I was so ashamed. that's why, I mean, people never believe me when I say this, but it was really harder for me to learn Spanish than it was to learn Russian or Mandarin Chinese because of all the shame. And the only way I actually finally learned it was when I moved to Mexico. And it just so happened that a friend of mine let me stay in, a painter friend of mine from the United States was renting a room. And he's like, oh yeah, all my roommates are artists, and yeah, you can come and live with them. But what he didn't mention was that they were all gay men, and which was fabulous. And so when I arrived, they were like very joyful, jubilant. Madonna was blasting, and like they were just, and our house was actually known as La Joteria of Querétaro, Mexico. So it was like the gay palace of Mexico. So there was just a continuous stream of like gay men in the house all the time. And they were all just fascinated by me, and they were like, hey, what's going on? And I'm like, anyway, so I, if you're in that situation and you're a journalist and it was also amazing because Querétaro is actually a very conservative Mexican town, and so they would like transform, so they would come out the street and they would like make a beeline to the bathroom, and there was like the community tub of hair gel. And they would like spike their hair and, do something with their shirt, and like they would just be like more open. And they would walk differently when they were inside the house and when they were outside the house. And all this like journalistically is like, oh my God, I need to write all of this down. And so then I was like, okay, I'm going to use this few Spanish words I know. And they ended up becoming my teachers. And I'm just so profoundly grateful that they were incredibly patient, and they would like listen until I could spit out what I wanted to say, and they would correct my grammar, and anyway. So that's how I learned finally. So that's my advice. Like the best way to learn is to put yourself in a community that only speaks the language you're trying to learn, and a community you desperately want to learn from, and then it begins to kind of happen. Yeah. Y'all are beautiful. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you.
Stephanie, you took us all the way there and back again tonight. Thank you so much for everything you brought to us and showed us about empathy and getting a life. And her books are for sale in the back. She'll be signing some, and so please get your hands on it, read her work. Thank you for being here with us tonight.